When it comes to change, there is a classic model of change which can serve to be of use. And this model outlines 6 specific stages that we go through when we embrace any change in our lives. The first stage is called pre-contemplation. That means that the person isn't even aware that change would be appropriate. They have yet to discover that there is anything unsatisfactory about their habits or what they're doing. They've yet to discover that there is a superior way of doing things. After pre-contemplation comes contemplation. That's when the person's thinking, that might be worth finding out more about. That might be worth considering. After contemplation, we have planning for action. Because if we contemplate something and decide that, yes, this is something I want to do, the next stage is to plan for action. We're still not doing it at that point. We're planning for it. I've been in situations in my life where I have written list after list and drawn out plans for what I'm going to do extensively. And not all of them I followed through to the next stage to actually take the action I've planned for. Once action is taken, the challenge then is to maintain that new change. That's the hard thing to do. The news about habits is that though we're familiar with that saying, habits are difficult to break, new, good, superior habits are included in that. So it's not just the old, difficult, self-destroying habits that are difficult to break, but the new habits, once established, are difficult to break. Once they become a habit, that is exactly what that means. It is an automatic behavior. So then we can terminate the attempt to change. In our lives, various ideals and things we're trying to strive for, and in all those different compartments of our lives, we're at different stages on that model of change. Anywhere from pre-contemplation right the way through to not even having to pay attention now to that new habit because it has automatic. But 2 stages in that model deserve a lot of attention. The planning for action and the action. And this is where people get into trouble because the planning for action has not been specific enough. To give you an example, maybe this is a scenario that you can relate to. The person has decided that they are going to consume a diet such as Doug wrote up here earlier, with all those lovely raw, fresh, ripe, organic, plant-based foods. And they go along to a party, and before they go, they have dinner, because they know there's not going to be much to eat, so they eat before they go. They have this beautiful big raw salad, and then they turn up at the party, and they're only there a short while when somebody comes up with a plate and offers it to them. And on the plate, all around the outside, are these beautifully cut vegetables. And on the inside is this smelly pot of hummus. And the person stands there, and there's that moment when part of their brain is in battle with another part of their brain. Part of their brain is saying, oh, but that's cooked chickpeas, and we don't eat cooked food, we've made this commitment, and it's got garlic in it, we've made that commitment as well, we're only going to eat foods that are natural to my biological adaptation. And then the other side of the brain is saying, oh, but come on, look at all those vegetables, and it's cold. And this battle goes on, and there's a moment of mental paralysis as the hand is poised, and the brain is doing battle. And the problem is that there is no real point of reference. If there was something that that person could reach out to in that moment that would clarify the decision, that would be helpful. Often they haven't planned for that. So the chances are that they take a vegetable and say, no thank you to the hummus, and then when someone's not looking, they sneak round to the kitchen and they're busy shoveling it in because they're feeling guilty. They know that although they want to do that and they're making that choice, it isn't right. Now is the opportunity for us to be specific in our planning. This is where we get to do play. Something I call a tricycle map. Tricycle, in this sense, tri meaning 3 and cycle meaning circles, to help you to draw out a map for yourself. Face it, if we're trying to bring about change, we're starting from some point of departure and we're heading for a destination. If we know what that destination is, clearly it can be extremely helpful. I warn you, it does require you to be honest with yourself. I do encourage you to be brutally honest with yourself. It'll make a big difference. On one piece of paper, draw the largest circle that will fit on the paper. Inside of that, I'd like you to draw another but smaller circle, and then finally a smaller one inside of that. Relatively equidistant between the circles so that you have some nice gaps, because we're going to write things in these places. When it comes to the foods that are currently in your diet, they could be classified in 3 categories. One category, foods that I regularly and habitually consume. Another category of foods that you do not eat because you don't like them, because you have decided they're health destroying. Whatever circumstance you were in, you would refuse consuming these foods. Take it as a given that none of us know what we would be willing to eat were we starving to death. In a position where the only thing to eat to live was a dead human being. Maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't, who knows? We're not going to go out into the realms of the maybe, possible, could be's. We're talking about your life as it is at the moment. That third category is the particularly interesting one, and this is the one that can get us into trouble. The third category is those foods that you rarely, but occasionally, include in your diet. They're not a daily habitual part of your diet, and they're not the sorts of foods that you would say under no circumstances will I consume those, but they're rare and they're occasional. Begin with this very outer circle right in that currently. Now this isn't ideally what you would like to see yourself doing. This is what you are doing today, this week. Those foods that you would not, under any circumstances, consume. If you want to be detailed, supposing that you still occasionally include flesh products in your diet, perhaps you've managed to get the beef out and the venison out and the fish out, but you still have chicken. If that's the case, then you would be specific about the types of flesh and divide them up. However, if you simply do not eat flesh, you don't need to write down, you just put flesh. So the degree to which you subdivide it depends on your particular diet. See how much you can put in that outside column. I'll throw some suggestions up other than the flesh and other than the dairy, including beverages. Remember things like alcohol, tea, coffee, chocolate, confectionery, deep-fried foods. It's not just the food itself. Potatoes you might include. Or perhaps you're a person who's decided you don't have deep-fried food, so you'd be quite specific and put their French fries in that outside circle. Whatever it is, that if you were offered it, you would say no. Think about also things that are added to your food, condiments, spices, herbs. You might also want to include supplements or so-called superfoods and other such things that are available in the shops today. In order to help us, because I know half the problem is you're thinking of all those things you might have missed out, let's have people calling out some foods they've got in their outside list, because somebody else might think, oh yes, I've forgotten, I haven't put that down.
Milk.
Milk. Dairy. Bread. Popcorn.
Cereal.
Candy. Cereal.
Garlic.
Coffee. Sugar. Tea.
Heated fat.
Heated fat.
MSG.
MSG. And there might be a classification as foods such as foods containing any additives.
Roasted nuts.
Roasted nuts. Tofu. Genetically engineered foods. Another grouping where it's not the food specifically, but it's the way that it's been affected. Pork. Shellfish. All flesh. The next step, we're going to take those foods that are part of your habitual daily diet, the real staples of your diet currently. This isn't what you'd like to see them in an ideal world. This is what they genuinely are. And I want you to put these right in this center circle. Remember, you can use groupings again. You don't list bananas, apricots, peaches, cherries, pears, but fruit. Remember when you've got just fruits and vegetables. Remember when you're listing fruits and vegetables, you might want to put raw vegetables, you might want to put steamed vegetables, you might want to put fried vegetables, you might want to put canned vegetables, you might want to put frozen vegetables. It gives you some more to put in the outside circle too, possibly, yes. Again, with nuts, you wouldn't necessarily have to list pecan nuts, Brazil nuts, filberts, but nuts. You can group them in one grouping. In the center here. Yeah. The outside one is foods that are the furthest away from who you are. The inside circle is what you are currently consuming. And we're now going to launch into this circle. And this is the interesting one. This is the rarely, occasionally circle in the middle that is suspended between the never and the regular. The rarely, occasionally. So what can you put in that one? I'm just going to call out a few foods that come to my mind in case you haven't added them yet. Grains. You might want to put bread, cereal, pasta, rice, corn. Substances which are sold separate from their original form, such as wheat germ, bran, fibre that is sold as a supplement. We've already mentioned supplements.
Is raw corn right?
Raw corn. It depends how old it is. If you're getting corn on the cob, if it's really young and tender, you're going to find that that's essentially the simple sugars we're looking at. But as it matures, it turns very starchy and is challenging for the system. Remember, you've got the beverages, teas, coffees, maybe herb teas, fruit teas, water you may or may not have down there, whether it's tap water, bottled water, fizzy drinks, sodas.
Anything in an aluminum can.
Anything in an aluminum can, that's a nice all-encompassing category. Dried fruit, have you got that one down? Legumes or pulses such as chickpeas, mung beans, aduki beans, kidney beans. You can get dates fresh or dried. Usually what you'll be getting are largely dried or partially dried. It's not easy to get absolutely fresh dates.
You can get fresh dates here.
You can? From the stem still. Yeah, you could include those. So are you pretty confident at this point that you've got down the bulk of it? You can always go home and do this in your own time once you've got the swing of the exercise. What I want you to do now is something very important. I want you to look at this, whatever it is you've got on your paper, and see that as your point of departure. And now what we're going to do is we're going to make a few changes in what you've got to start putting together your point of destination. Do not try and make too many changes in one go. It is better to take fewer changes and adhere to them than to set yourself this enormous task and not be able to stick with it. So I would like you to place any arrows on that map where you'd like to see things shift to a different area. There might be something here in your regular part of your diet that you would like to see shift out to the rarely occasionally circle. There might also, of course, be that things you don't currently consume at all, and you'd like to bring them in perhaps to consume them regularly. Perhaps things you do consider are healthful and you just don't get around to providing yourself with them. There could be things in your rarely occasionally circle that you want to send out to the never circle. Sit there and see what arrows you can put in, where you can make shifts of things. Try to be realistic. If this is going to be your next destination, you're not trying to draw up the ideal diet when you do this. You're trying to plan out your next step. A lot of little steps that are very firmly placed on the ground will bring you to your destination far more efficiently than a few giant leaps and bounds where you fall off and crash into the ditch. Little steps, but consistent.
What do you consider wild rice?
What do I consider wild rice? Wild rice is theoretically a seed, not a grain. I know that some people find it very useful, particularly in transition, because it certainly has the feel as you eat it of a grain. Soak that or do whatever with it, yeah. Okay, what you would then do, and you can do this in your own time at home, is draw up your new tricycle map with everything in its new place. And that tricycle map you can remember by studying. You can pin it onto your refrigerator door. You can keep a copy of it in your pocketbook or in your jacket or your trouser pocket. You can take it with you wherever you go, in your head or on a piece of paper. So next time you go to the party and the tray of hummus comes up with the vegetables around it, and that moment of almost paralysis as you make that decision, all you need to do is bring to mind your tricycle map and see which circle hummus falls into. Cooked legumes. And as soon as you see which circle it's in, you'll know what to do. If it's in this outside circle, it's simply no thank you.
Isn't there such a thing as raw hummus?
People do make raw hummus for sure, and I'm certain that if you asked Jackie, she would have a recipe for you. It might be that you bring your tricycle map to mind on that occasion and you see it's in your rarely occasionally column. You say to yourself, yes, I'm in the party, rarely occasionally. But let's be clear what rarely occasionally actually is. This is the tricky one. If rarely occasionally is happening more than once a month, it is not rarely occasionally. That is being as generous as one possibly can be with the term rarely occasionally. If it's happening once a year, it's a little bit more authentically rarely occasionally. But if it's less than once a month, there's no way, by anyone's judgment, I don't believe that that could be seen as rarely and occasionally. Try and be honest again when you're doing that central map there. Today's quote, F.W. Nichols said, "When you get right down to the root of the meaning of the word succeed, you find it means to follow through." That's quite a profound statement, because isn't it true that when we look back and we try to evaluate if we've succeeded at something or not, very often we will see that if there were any slips or falls or any mistakes or anything wasn't quite perfect, that we failed. But in fact, if we have followed through on our intentions, what more could be asked of us? But following through on those intentions is not easy if we haven't clarified for ourselves what our intentions are. And remember I said to you, once you get to a point where a new habit has been formed, it requires no energy or focus to maintain. It has become an automatic behavior. Well, once that has occurred, you can then pull out your new tricycle map and put in your next set of arrows as to how you'd like to see your next step be. And then from that, you draw up another new tricycle map. Until eventually, step by step, you'll end up with a map that is actually written out as your ideal diet, and you're actually living your ideal diet. Don't expect not to trip and fall occasionally. The idea of being perfect in anything that we do in life is a waste of time. What we do find, though, is that when we trip and fall, it's giving us the opportunity to learn from that experience. Why did I trip and fall? It certainly wasn't because you're a lesser person, or you're a person with no self-discipline, or you're a hopeless case, or any other terminology. It occurred for a reason. So find out what that reason was and do something about it so that it doesn't happen the next time. Remember, planning is a real key to success. The number of people I know who have said that they're very keen to follow through on their commitment, but they don't somehow seem to have that forethought to plan. Somebody invites them to go and stay for the weekend. So they throw their bags in the car and they remember all their clothes. They remember the books they want to read. They remember to take the directions and the telephone number. They even put fuel in the car. But they forget that may well be their food provisions will not be there. And I have to share with you from experience that when people say, don't worry, I have exactly what you will need, or we have oodles of fruit and oodles of vegetables, smile sweetly and say, that sounds so nice, thank you, and take your own. Okay? Because numerous times I have had to learn this lesson again and again in the past when I started on this path, was that what to me is an abundance of fruit or an abundance of vegetables is not the same as somebody else's evaluation of what's abundant. Have you ever been to somewhere where you said, can I have a nice big salad? And you keep saying the word big, and you say big several times more before you finally go and sit down and leave them to it. And you sit there mouth-watering in anticipation at your big salad that's coming, and it arrives. And it is big if you are 2 inches tall. You sit there and you end up hungry, and then, of course, the temptation to go off the diet. The truth of it is that when our thoughts or our words or our actions are not congruent with who we believe ourselves to be, that is the most painful place you can be. And unfortunately, if we think back to what we talked about on the second evening, as soon as you have done an action that is not congruent with who you believe yourself to be, it's an uncomfortable emotional place. And the temptation then, of course, is to eat food to numb your emotions so you don't experience that uncomfortable place. And this is where we can get on that downward spiral. Hopefully your tricycle map will help you to bring it to mind, know what your commitment was, and as F.W. Nichol says, to succeed by following through. Thank you. And as F.W. Nichol says, to succeed